Hey friends, it's 5:30, which means we're hopping back into the Bible. Hope all of you are doing well. I think all there is to do is pray and then hop in. So, come divine interpreter, bring me eyes thy book to read, ears the mystic words to hear, words which did from thee proceed, words that endless bliss impart, kept in our obedient hearts. All who read or hear are blessed, if thy plain commands we do. Of thy kingdom here possessed, thee we shall in glory view. When thou comest on earth to abide, will reign triumphant at thy side. We're in chapter 2 of Joshua. I read in the King James because even despite the dated language, it is the most commonly read English Bible. It's also the Bible that John Wesley read and commented on. So, it just seems appropriate. Chapter 2. And Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, Go view the land, even Jericho. And they went and came into a harlot's house named Rahab and lodged there. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, Behold, there came men in hither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country. And the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab, saying, Bring forth the men that are come to thee, which are entered into thine house, for they be come to search out all the country. And the woman took the 2 men and hid them, and said thus, There came men unto me, but I wist not whence they were. And it came to pass about the time of shutting of the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Whither the men went, I wot not. Pursue after them quickly, for ye shall overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof of the house, and hid them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order upon the roof. And the men pursued after them the way to Jordan unto the fords. And as soon as they which pursued after them were gone, they shut the gate. And before they were laid down, she came up unto them upon the roof. And she said unto the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when ye came out of Egypt, and what ye did unto the 2 kings of the Amorites that were on the other side Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. And as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. Now therefore I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that ye will also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token. And that ye will save alive my father and my mother and my brethren and my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. And the men answered her, Our life for yours, if ye utter not this our business. And it shall be, when the Lord hath given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with thee. Then she let them down by a cord through the window, for her house was upon the town wall, and she dwelt upon the wall. And she said unto them, Get you to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you, and hide yourselves there 3 days, until the pursuers be returned, and afterward may ye go your way. And the men said unto her, We will be blameless of this thine oath which thou hast made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, thou shalt bind this line of scarlet thread in the window which thou didst let us down by. And thou shalt bring thy father and thy mother and thy brethren and all thy father's household home unto thee. And it shall be that whosoever shall go out of the doors of thy house into the street, his blood shall be upon his head, and we will be guiltless. And whosoever shall be with thee in the house, his blood shall be on our head, if any hand be upon him. And if thou utter this our business, then we will be quit of thine oath, which thou hast made us to swear. And she said, According unto your words, so be it. And she sent them away, and they departed. And she bound the scarlet line in the window. And they went and came unto the mountain, and abode there 3 days, until their pursuers were returned. And the pursuers sought them throughout all the way, but found them not. So the 2 men returned, and descended from the mountain, and passed over, and came to Joshua the son of Nun, and told him all things that befell them. And they said unto Joshua, Truly the Lord hath delivered into our hands all the land, for even all the inhabitants of the country do faint because of us. Thus ends the 2nd chapter. The way that John Wesley organizes it is that Joshua sends spies to Jericho in verse 1. Rahab receives and conceals them in verses 2 through 7. Her agreement with them for the safety of herself and her family in verses 8 through 21. The return of the spies and the account given by them in verses 22 through 24. Verse 1. There are a couple notes there. And Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly. So the first note that's worthy is that he only sent 2 men, not 12 as Moses did, because those were to view the whole land, but these just a small parcel of it. When it says to spy, that means to learn the state of the land and people. It is evident Joshua did not this out of distrust. It is probable he had God's command and direction in it for the encouragement of himself and his army. When he says he sent them secretly, that's with reference not to his enemies, that being the practice of all spies, but to the Israelites. It's a good caution to prevent the inconveniency which possibly might have arisen if their report had been discouraging. So in I want to say Exodus, Moses sent out 12 spies to go and search out the Holy Land. And when they came back, they said, we cannot take them. The Anakim giants are there. We're dead meat if we go in there. When they came back, their report discouraged everybody, and it made the Lord upset. JW is saying this time, Joshua sent the spies out secretly so that when they came back, no one would be waiting for their report. They couldn't discourage everybody like the previous time. When it says he sent them to Jericho, that is the land around Jericho, together with the city. In Hebrew, the land and Jericho, that is especially Jericho. Okay. When it says they went to a harlot's house, so the Hebrew word is used in Judges 6, verse 1 as well, and so is rendered by 2 apostles in Hebrews 11:31 and James chapter 2, verse 25. Such she either now was, or rather had been formerly. I think the only reason to say that she formerly was is to protect the purity of these spies. There doesn't seem to be anything in the text suggesting that these spies were particularly concerned with their own righteousness. The reasons for visiting a harlot are pretty plain. Okay. When it says that they lodged there, they went and came into a harlot's house named Rahab and lodged there. Lodge also means lay down, as the same word is rendered in verse 8. They composed themselves to rest, but they were hindered from that intention, obviously. Verse 3, and the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab, saying, Bring forth the men that are come to thee. Probably Israel had but one friend in all Jericho, and God directed them to her! ! Thus, what seems to be most accidental is often overruled to serve the great ends of providence. And to those that acknowledge God in their ways, he will guide them with his eye. Yeah, some of us know there probably is such a thing as coincidence, but a lot of times things that we think are coincidence actually are not. Here, what JW chooses to see is that out of the whole city of Jericho, there's only one person who would possibly support them, and it's this woman, Rahab. We don't know that. All we know is she was in favor. She was a good partner for them. She protected them. We don't know that there was no one else who would have done so. We'd like to hope that, because then, I mean, as it happens, if spoiler alert, they're going to invade Jericho and kill everybody in there except for Rahab and her people. So if it's the case that Rahab's not the only one willing to work with them, then the Lord, through his army, is putting to death several people who would be on his side. So that's what's at stake here. Verse 4, the phrase, and the woman, quote, and the woman took the two men and hid them and said thus, there came men unto me, but I wist not whence they were. Another faithful translation would be, but the woman had taken and had hid them before the messengers came from the king. As soon as she understood from her neighbors that there was a suspicion of the matter, and guessed that search would be made, and this is justly mentioned as a great and generous act of faith in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31. Hebrews is in the New Testament. For she apparently ventured her life upon a steadfast persuasion of the truth of God's word and promise given to the Israelites. When she says she didn't know whence they were, her answer contained in these and the following words, it was a false answer, and therefore unquestionably sinful, though her intention was good therein. But it is very probable she, being a heathen, might think that an officious lie is not unlawful. So here again, once again, the problem is, oh my gosh, there is a sinner behaving sinfully, and yet it glorifies God. So it does open up problems if someone tries to justify their own sin by saying, hey, look, Rahab was a prostitute and she lied, and yet she still glorified God, so I can sleep around and I can be dishonest in my speech, and God is still glorified. Part of the faithful response to that is God is glorified in everything. He's glorified in good and in bad. There's nothing in this world that can keep from God glorifying himself in. The question is not, can God be glorified by this? The question is, whose side am I on as I do this? Now, one could still come back and say Rahab was on God's side, duh. But here, it's not necessarily, the question isn't her salvation. It's just, is she allowed to live? So God allows all kinds of sinners to live every day. The question is not, who does God allow to live? The question is, who experiences eternal salvation under God? And that's not everybody. In verse 6, it talks about how she hid them in the roof. JW says, which was flat after their manner, upon the roof, that they might be dried by the heat of the sun. But she had brought them up to the roof of the house, and she hid them in the stalks of flax which she had laid in order upon the roof. Okay, so the flax are up there that they might be dried by the heat of the sun. Flax is a kind of plant. I can't pretend to know much about it. I just know what flax seed is. We put it in our oatmeal in the morning. Verse 7, it talks about fords, quote, and the men pursued after them the way to Jordan unto the fords. JW says, or passages, that is, the places where people used to pass over Jordan, whether by boats or bridges. So that's what a ford would be. It also talks about a gate, and as soon as they which pursued them were gone, they shut the gate. The gate of the city of Jericho, to prevent the escape of the spies, if peradventure Rahab was mistaken and they yet lurked within. So the spies are now trapped in the city. In verse 8, it's that word about laying down, and before they were laid down, she came up unto them upon the roof. So it's that same verb as in verse 1, and they lodged there. Verse 9, there's the phrase, your terror, when she's talking to the spies, saying, your terror. Let's see. And she said unto the men, that's verse 9, right? Yeah. I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us. She's not saying the Hebrews are terrified, the Israelites are terrified. She's saying that they are terrified of the Israelites, the Jerichoians. In verse 11, the word melted is used. She's still talking, Rahab is. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts did melt. That means they were dissolved. They lost all courage. Okay, so in our language today, sometimes when someone's heart melts, oh, that means they're feeling all gushy and warm. Here, that's not what it's saying. It's saying that their heart, the source of their courage, melted. They have no courage left. They're completely discouraged. Verse 12, by the Lord, quote, now therefore I pray you swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that you will show kindness unto my father's house and give me a true token. She asks that they swear, quote, by your God, JW says, who is the only true God. So she owns his worship, one eminent act whereof is swearing by his name. Maybe. She doesn't necessarily seem to be showing faith in their God, does she? She knows they're going to die because of how great their army is. She does say in verse 9, I know that the Lord hath given you the land. So she does believe in Yahweh. As to whether or not she believes Yahweh is the only true God, I'm not sure that that's evidenced in the text. When she talks about saving her father's house, that means her near kindred, which she particularly names in verse 13. Husband and children, it seems she had none. And for herself it was needless to speak, it being a plain and undeniable duty to save their preserver. When she demands a true token, that means either an assurance that you will preserve me and mine from the common ruin, or a token which I may produce as a witness of this agreement and a means of my security. This is all that she asks. But God did for her more than she could ask or think. She was afterwards advanced to be a princess in Israel, the wife of Salmon, and one of the ancestors of Christ. How did I forget that? So apparently her story doesn't end when she survives the invasion. In verse 13, the phrase, all that they have, is used. Quote, and that you will save alive my father and my mother and my brethren and my sisters and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. All that they have is their children, as appears from chapter 6, verse 23. In verse 14, there's a phrase for yours, quote, and the men answered her, our life for yours. What that means is we will venture our lives for the security of yours. Okay? If ye utter not this our business, and it shall be when the Lord hath given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with thee. So when they're talking about their business, if ye utter not this our business, that is this agreement of ours and the condition of it, lest others under this pretense should secure themselves. So what one might assume is that the business that they're saying she shouldn't talk about is that they're going to come and invade Jericho. But here JW is saying, no, not that business. The business that they're going to come and not kill Rahab, and they're going to kill everybody else. Because if they find out about it, other people are going to try and get in on this deal. By which they show both their piety and prudence in managing their oath with so much circumspection, that neither their own consciences might be ensnared, nor the public justice obstructed. Yeah, I don't know how to reflect upon that. Yeah, and I don't know how to. Yeah, now that I'm reading it his way, I'm thinking it's more faithful. But I don't know. In verse 15, there's talk of the town wall, which gave her the opportunity of dismissing them when the gates were shut. When it says her house was upon the wall, her particular dwelling was there, which may possibly be added because the other part of her house was reserved for the entertainment of strangers. The whole notion here is it's a walled city back before modern times, before guns and cannons and missiles. They just built walls around each town that they wanted to defend. But apparently, people's domiciles could be built into the walls so that they would have a window on the outside of the wall. It doesn't make much sense defensively, but even so, that's what was going on here. Verse 16, it talks about the mountain, quote, and she said unto them, get you to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you, and hide yourselves there 3 days until the pursuers be returned. That is to some of the mountains wherewith Jericho was encompassed. So Jericho was surrounded by mountains. Jericho was super low, elevation-wise. But these mountains, also there were many caves which they might lurk. And then she says to stay there 3 days, not the 3 whole days, but 1 whole day and part of 2 days. He's always so concerned with the logistics of given things. Okay. In verse 17, there's a question about said, and the men said unto her, we will be blameless of this thine oath which thou hast made us swear. Or they had said, namely before she let them down, it being very improbable either that she would dismiss them before the condition was agreed on, or that she would discourse with them, or they with her, about such secret and weighty things after they were let down. They'd be hollering back and forth when others might overhear them. When they say that we will be blameless of this thine oath, that means free from guilt or reproach if it be violated, namely if the following condition be not observed. So yeah, if you don't put the scarlet thread up there, then you can die. Verse 18, there's a phrase, into the land. Quote, behold, when we come into the land, thou shalt bind this line of scarlet thread. That is, when they come over the Jordan and near the city, she'll tie this line of scarlet. That's probably the same with which she was about to let them down. I don't know why he would say that. When it talks about the window, they're talking about putting the line of scarlet out the window so that it can be easily discerned by the soldiers. In verse 19, there's a phrase, upon his head. And it shall be that whosoever shall go out of the doors of this thy house into the street, his blood shall be upon his head, and we will be guiltless. The blame of his death shall rest wholly upon himself. That's what upon his head means, as being occasioned by his own neglect of the means of safety. And whosoever shall be with thee in the house, his blood shall be on our head, if any hand be upon him. So when they say that, it means we are willing to bear the sin, the shame, and the punishment of it. When it says, if any hand be upon him, that means so as to kill him. So they're making a deal if Israelite soldiers break in and kill any of her relatives, then they will suffer the punishment for it, those who are making the oath. Verse 21, there's a phrase, in the window. And she said, according unto your words, so be it. And she sent them away, and they departed. And she bound the scarlet line in the window. JW says, forthwith, partly that the spies might see it hung out before their departure, and so the better know it at some distance, partly lest some accident might occasion a neglect about it. Okay, sure. Verse 22, it talks about the 3 days, quote, and they went and came unto the mountain and abode there 3 days until the pursuers were returned, quote, supporting themselves there with the provisions which Rahab had furnished them. When it talks about the ways in verse 22, and the pursuers sought them throughout all the way, but found them not. That is, in the road to Jordan and the places near it, but not in the mountains. And then in verse 23 it says, so the two men returned and descended from the mountain and passed over. That's in referring to Jordan. They passed over the river Jordan back to Joshua. Okay. On to chapter 3. And Joshua rose early in the morning, and they removed from Shittim and came to Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over. And it came to pass after 3 days that the officers went through the host, and they commanded the people, saying, when ye see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then ye shall remove from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Come not near unto it, that ye may know the way by which ye must go, for ye have not passed this way heretofore. And Joshua said unto the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And Joshua spake unto the priests, saying, take up the ark of the covenant, and pass over before the people. And they took up the ark of the covenant, and went before the people. And the Lord said unto Joshua, this day will I begin to magnify thee in the sight of Israel, so that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. And thou shalt command the priests that bear the ark of the covenant, saying, when ye are come to the brink of the water of Jordan, ye shall stand still in Jordan. And Joshua said unto the children of Israel, come hither, and hear the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, hereby ye shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail out from before you, that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Hivites, and the Perizzites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth passeth over before you into Jordan. Now therefore take you 12 men out of the tribes of Israel, out of every tribe a man. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand upon a heap. And it came to pass, when the people removed from their tents to pass over Jordan, and the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and it came to pass, when the people removed from their tents to pass over the Jordan, and the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and I think I might have repeated verse 14. And as they that bear the ark were come unto Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest, that the waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon a heap very far from the city Adam, that is beside Zaretan, and those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho. And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan, and all the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. Thus ends chapter 3. The way this is broken up is the people decamp from Shittim and are directed to follow the ark and sanctify themselves in verses 1 through 5. The priests are ordered to go first in verse 6, Joshua being encouraged and directed as God tells the people what God is about to do, verses 7 through 13. Jordan is divided and Israel marches through in verses 14 through 17. Verse 1, when it talks about in the morning, quote, and Joshua rose early in the morning, and they removed from Shittim and came to Jordan, he and all the children of Israel. Not after the return of the spies, but after the 3 days. It's referring to chapter 1, verse 11. pass through the host and command the people, saying, prepare your victuals, for within 3 days ye shall pass over this Jordan. So that already happened, and then the spies were sent out. As it follows in verse 3, when it says lodge there, that's in verse 1, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over. That night they lodged there, that they might go over in the daytime, that the miracle might be more evident and unquestionable, and strike the greater terror into their enemies. Yeah, you don't want to perform a miracle at night when nobody's watching. You want to do it in the daytime. Same notion as when Jesus says, let your light shine before others. In the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, he says our good works are light that we should let shine in front of other people so that other people can see our good works and glorify God. Verse 2, the phrase after 3 days, quote, and it came to pass after 3 days that the officers went through the host. That means either at the end of these 3 days or upon the last of them. When it says they went through the host the second time to give them more particular directions, as they had given them a general notice in chapter 1, verses 10 and 11. And in verse 3, it talks about how he commanded the people. No, the officers commanded the people. And they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests and the Levites bearing it, then you shall remove from your place and go after it. In Joshua's name, and by his authority, they commanded the people. When it talks about the priests and Levites moving the ark, the Levites were not only, no, the priests were not only Levites, but priests also. No, that doesn't make sense. For although the Levites were to carry the ark, in Numbers 4, verses 1 through 15, yet the priests might perform that office, and did so upon some solemn occasions. Here he's making a distinction between priests and Levites, but Levites are just members of the tribe, and the only people who could become priests were of the tribe of Levi. So there's something here I'm not understanding about the distinction he's making. When the officers command the people to go after the ark, that means towards Jordan, to go over it in such a manner as I'm about to describe. Till this time the ark went in the middle of the cloudy pillar. Now it goes in the front. Probably the pillar of fire and cloud was still hovering over the ark. So, as is made clear in Exodus, the Lord leads the Israelites by a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of smoke by day. And usually this pillar is over the Ark of the Covenant. So here JW is making a comment about where that pillar would be in this scenario. Verse 4, there's a notion to 2,000 cubits, quote, yet there shall be a space between you and the ark, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Come not near unto it, that ye may know the way by which ye must go, for ye have not passed this way heretofore. 2,000 cubits is 1,000 yards, at which distance from it the Israelites seem to have been encamped in the wilderness. And because they generally went from their tents to the ark to worship God, especially on the Sabbath days, hence it hath been conceived that a Sabbath day's journey reached only to 2,000 cubits. But that may be doubted, for those who encamped nearest the ark were at that distance from it, and came so far, but the rest were farther from it, and their Sabbath day's journey was considerably longer. So he's just addressing this question of what a Sabbath day's journey is, and that's a unit of length, distance, that is used in New Testament times as well. When it talks about how they shall not be near unto it, partly from the respect they should bear to the ark, but chiefly that the ark marching so far before you into the river and standing still there till you pass over may give you the greater assurance of your safe passage. Ye have not passed this way heretofore, it said at the end of the verse. While we are here, we must expect unusual events to pathways that we have not passed before, and much more when we go hence, when we pass through the valley of the shadow of death. But if we have the assurance of God's presence, what have we to fear? So he kind of like theorizes why it is that the people would need to keep such a distance between themselves and the Ark of the Covenant. He says partly for respect, and then partly because like there's about to be a miracle. The waters of the Jordan are about to stop flowing and stand in a heap, and they just need to like see that. They need to have some time to absorb that, to imagine, to understand what's going on rather than springing it on them and they're just right there. It is possible that the Ark of the Covenant is kind of like a weapon, and that usually it's not like revved and ready to go, but as they're coming closer to Jericho, as he's about to do this miracle, that like more glory is emanating, more power, and that if they're too close, like they'll get killed. I think the Indiana Jones effect is real, man. I think the Ark, well, we're going to see. Ark of the Covenant has power. Verse 5, the phrase, and Joshua said unto the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Or rather, Joshua had already said the day before the passage, for it follows tomorrow. When he says sanctify yourselves, means both in soul and body, that you may be acceptable to receive such a favor, and with more reverence observe this great work and fix it in your hearts. In verse 6, there's the phrase take up, quote, and Joshua spake unto the priests, saying, take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass over before the people. And they took up the Ark of the Covenant and went before the people. When he says take up, namely upon your shoulders, for so they were to carry it, according to Numbers chapter 7, verse 9. When he says before the people, that's not in the middle of them, as you used to do. I wish he had some scriptural references for that. In verse 7, it talks about magnifying thee, quote, and the Lord said unto Joshua, this day will I begin to magnify thee in the sight of Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. That is, the Lord's going to magnify Joshua to gain him authority among them as the person the Lord had set in Moses' stead, and by whom he would conduct them to the possession of the promised land. So it'd be understandable if at this point a number of people are asking, does Joshua really need to be the leader? And the Lord is saying, hey, I'm going to solidify your leadership here. In verse 8, it talks about the brink, quote, and thou shalt command the priests that bear the Ark of the Covenant, saying, when ye are come to the brink of the water of Jordan, ye shall stand still in the Jordan. In Hebrew, the phrase is to the extremity, so far as the river then spread itself, which was now more than ordinary, according to verse 15. When it talks about in the Jordan, it means within the waters of Jordan, in the first entrance into the river, where they stood for a season till the river was divided, and then they went into the midst of it, and there abode till all the people were passed over. So there's stages that come and just stand in the shallow part, and then whenever it stops flowing and it's in a heap, then they just move a little bit more and stand right in the middle of the riverbed that's now dry. When the Lord says, come hither, he means to the ark or tabernacle, the place of public assemblies. Oh, yeah. So I think the reason JW excludes my option as to why they shouldn't be close to the ark is because they're going to be standing right there and everybody's going to be walking right by the ark. So if it was revved up and in super powerful mode, they would die right then, and they don't. So my theory is wrong. When it talks in verse 9, okay, it says, and Joshua said unto the children of Israel, come hither and hear the words of the Lord your God. So Joshua is saying to the people, come hither to the ark or tabernacle, the place of public assemblies. Listen to the word of the Lord your God. Quote, JW says, who is now able to give a proof that he is both the Lord, the omnipotent governor of heaven and earth and all creatures, and he is your God, in covenant with you, having a tender care and affection for you. In verse 10, there's the phrase, ye shall know. And Joshua said, hereby ye shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Jebusites. It's worth getting good at saying those, because they say them several times. By this ye shall know, by experience and sensible evidence. When he talks about the living God, he means not a dull, dead, senseless God, such as the gods of the nations are, but a God of life and power and activity to watch over you and work over you. Yeah, that's his understanding of what it means to say that our God is the living God. When in verse 10 it also says among you, quote, and that he will without fail drive out from before you. No. Earlier, hereby you shall know that the living God is among you. That means he is present with you to strengthen and help you. He's not literally there bodily. Verse 12, it talks about 12 men for the work described in chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. So we haven't gotten there yet. Verse 13, it talks about the ark of the Lord. Let's see, quote, and it shall come to pass as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above. About the ark, that so it may appear, this is the Lord's doing, and that in pursuance of his covenant made with Israel. When it says he is Lord of all the earth, that means the Lord of all this globe of earth and water, who therefore can dispose of this river and the adjoining land as he pleaseth. When it says the waters are cut off, that means the waters which now are united shall now be divided. And part shall flow down the channel towards the Dead Sea, and the other part that is near the spring of the river and flows down from it shall stand still. When it says it stood in a heap, being as it were congealed, as the Red Sea was. And if you haven't read that, that's Exodus 15, verse 8, and so kept from overflowing the country. So before the Red Sea, it heaps up on both sides. Here at the Jordan, it just heaps up on that one, and then the other side just dries out. Verse 15, there's the phrase, all the time of harvest, quote, and as they that bear the ark were come unto Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for the Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest. This is meant not of wheat harvest, but of barley harvest, as is manifest from their keeping the Passover at their first entrance, in chapter 5, verse 10, which was kept on the 14th day of the first month, when they were to bring a sheaf of their first fruits, which were of barley. So that this harvest in those hot countries fell very early in the spring, when rivers used to swell most, partly because of the rains which have fallen all the winter, partly because of the snows which melt and come into the rivers. And this time God chose that the miracle might be more glorious, more amazing, and terrible to the Canaanites, and that the Israelites might be entertained at their first entrance with plentiful and comfortable provisions. So here, it's more impressive that it's like flowing more than usual, that God will cut it off, but also there's a convenient thing to the time of year where barley is ripe for the picking. I had never heard that before. In verse 16, that references a city, Adam, quote, that the waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon a heap very far from the city Adam, that is beside Zaratan. The city Adam, being more obscure, is described by its nearness to a more known place, then eminent, but now unknown. The meaning is that the waters were stopped in their course at that place, and so kept at a distance from the Israelites while they passed over. When it says they passed over against Jericho, here God carried them over because this part was, one, the strongest, as having in its neighborhood an eminent city, a potent king, and a stout and warlike people, and two, the most pleasant and fruitful, and therefore more convenient, both for the refreshment of the Israelites after their long and tedious marches, and for their encouragement. That's why Jericho. Finally, in verse 17, there's a phrase, stood firm, quote, and the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all the people were passed over, clean over Jordan. When they stood firm, that is, in one and the same place and posture, their feet neither moved by any waters moving in upon them, nor sinking into any mire, which one might think was at the bottom of the river. And this may be opposed to their standing on the bank of the water when they came to it, commanded in verse 8, which was but for a while, till the waters were divided and gone away, and then they were to go farther, even into the midst of Jordan, where they are to stand constantly and fixedly, as this Hebrew word signifies, until all were passed over. When it says the midst of Jordan, that means in the middle and deepest part of the river. That's what it says. It stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. Okay, so that was the end of chapter 3. It's been 45 minutes, but that's long enough. It's been a good day. Things really heat up here in a bit in Joshua, so stick with it. It's good. I hope to join you guys again tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. God bless you all. Okay, bye.